Her husband abandoned her in the woods with their triplets. Then she learned the terrifying truth. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. The sound of car tires crunching on gravel slowly faded away as Delilah Maxwell stood alone in the cold, dark woods. She was holding her 3 newborn babies close to her chest, trying to keep them warm. The autumn wind was blowing hard, and Delilah's hospital gown wasn't enough to protect her from the freezing cold. Just hours earlier, Delilah had given birth to triplets, but what should have been the happiest day of her life turned into a nightmare. Her husband, Robert, had driven her and the babies to a remote area and left them there. "I can't handle this responsibility," Robert had said, his voice cold as he drove away, leaving Delilah and the babies behind. They were all alone, far from the nearest town. The babies, only 2 days old, began to cry, their little faces scrunching up against the cold. Delilah felt weak. She had just had a C-section and her stomach hurt with every movement, but she knew she had to take care of her babies. The sun was setting and it was getting colder. She needed to find shelter fast. Delilah thought about the nursing training she had done before she got married, though she never finished her degree. She remembered what to do in emergencies. "Think, Delilah, think," she whispered to herself. The babies needed warmth. Without it, they could freeze. Delilah carefully tucked the babies, 2 girls and a boy, inside her hospital gown to use her body heat to keep them warm. Her stomach hurt with every step, but she couldn't stop. She remembered what she had learned: find shelter, build a fire, and get water. These simple things could mean life or death. As it got darker, Delilah saw what looked like an old hunting cabin through the trees. She felt hope rise in her chest, even though she was so tired. Every step hurt, but the baby's soft breathing gave her the strength to keep going. What Delilah didn't know was that this moment of being left alone in the woods would change her life and her babies' lives forever. Just as Delilah reached for the door of the cabin, she heard footsteps behind her. Someone was coming. She froze in fear, holding her babies tight. Then a light shined through the darkness, and a woman's voice called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" Delilah felt a wave of relief as an elderly woman appeared with a flashlight. She had silver hair tied in a neat bun, and she was wearing sturdy hiking boots and a warm jacket. "Oh my God," the woman gasped when she saw Delilah and the babies. "I'm Fiona Scott. I live just down the hill. I saw headlights and came to check." Fiona took charge right away, bringing Delilah and the babies to her home, which was a cozy cottage with a generator and lots of food. Fiona, a retired nurse, made sure the babies were safe and warm in a makeshift bassinet made from a drawer lined with soft blankets. Delilah learned that Fiona had delivered hundreds of babies during her career. Fiona said, "It wasn't by chance I found you. Someone must be watching over you." Delilah lay in a guest bed, her babies fed and warm, and started to tell Fiona about her life with Robert. Delilah and Robert had met 3 years ago when she was finishing her nursing degree. Robert was 15 years older than Delilah and seemed perfect. He was successful and charming. They got married quickly, and Delilah put her career on hold because Robert wanted her to. Things started to change after they got pregnant with triplets. Delilah said, "At first, Robert seemed happy, but when we found out we were having triplets, he didn't seem happy anymore." Fiona's face grew serious as she listened. "Delilah, I need to ask you something. Did Robert check you out of the hospital properly, or did he just take you?" Delilah hadn't thought about that. She remembered Robert saying he'd taken care of the paperwork, but she never signed anything. "He just wheeled me out when the nurses were changing shifts," Delilah said, suddenly understanding. "Oh God, he kidnapped us." Fiona's face became hard with determination. "We need to be careful now. Robert's committed a serious crime, but that also means—" She paused, thinking carefully. "Delilah, I think there's more to this than just him being overwhelmed by triplets. Have you ever looked into his past?" Before Delilah could answer, her son, the smallest of the triplets, started crying. Delilah quickly picked him up to comfort him. Fiona went to her phone, but stopped when she noticed the storm outside. The storm will probably knock out the phone line soon, but tomorrow I'll call a friend at the sheriff's department. I have a feeling Robert isn't just running from his responsibilities. I think he's running from something much darker. That night, as the storm raged outside, Delilah lay awake, holding her babies. She had named them Zan, Grace, and Cameron. Thunder shook the windows and lightning lit up the sky, but Delilah couldn't stop thinking about what would happen next. Somewhere, Robert was probably realizing his plan had failed. Delilah knew her husband well. She was certain that Robert would never leave loose ends. At that very moment, Robert was in a dimly lit office 60 miles away. He was making plans, but instead of feeling angry, his hands trembled with fear. Robert had secrets of his own, and the birth of the triplets was starting to uncover them. The storm got worse, and a car's headlights appeared in the distance, slowly moving along the road despite the weather. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the ground was covered with fallen branches, and the road to Fiona's house was muddy. Delilah sat by the kitchen window, holding Zan while Fiona prepared formula for the babies. Fiona had been a lifesaver, teaching Delilah how to care for all 3 babies at once. Suddenly, Fiona's old radio crackled with a local news report. Police are searching for Delilah Maxwell and her newborn triplets who disappeared from Memorial Hospital. Mrs. Maxwell, who had just undergone surgery 2 days ago, was last seen leaving the hospital with her husband, Robert Maxwell. The hospital staff began to worry when they noticed that she had been taken from the hospital without permission. Fiona, a nurse who worked there, immediately turned off the radio in the staff room. Her face was serious, and she knew something wasn't right. The storm had caused phone lines to go down, but once they were back up, she was determined to contact the authorities. As Fiona tried to make sense of the situation, she turned to Delilah and hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Delilah, there's something you need to know," Fiona said, her voice low and serious. "Last night, while you were sleeping, I recognized your husband's name." Delilah looked up in confusion, wondering where this conversation was headed. Fiona continued, 15 years ago, I worked at a hospital in Cincinnati. There was a case there. A woman named Rachel Turner was married to a man named Robert Maxwell." Delilah's heart began to race. The mention of Robert's name in connection with another woman was making her feel uneasy. Fiona paused for a moment, trying to find the right words. "Rachel disappeared shortly after giving birth to twins," she explained. "Robert claimed she had postpartum depression and left them. The police investigated, but they couldn't prove anything. The babies were found dead 2 weeks later, and they said it was sudden infant death syndrome, but many of us suspected foul play. Robert got a large payout from the insurance and then vanished." Delilah's world seemed to tilt, and she felt a chill run down her spine. Everything suddenly seemed to make sense. The strange behavior from Robert, the life insurance policies he had insisted on taking out for her and their babies, his increasing control over her during her pregnancy. The pieces were all falling into place, and Delilah felt a wave of horror sweep over her. "He never wanted any of us to survive," she whispered, her voice trembling. Fiona nodded grimly. "I'm afraid so," she said. "But there's more to it. Robert Maxwell isn't his real name. His real name is Deus Thorne, and he's been involved in a massive insurance fraud scheme for years. He's part of a group that targets wealthy families, especially those with multiple births, because the insurance payouts are higher in those cases. They manipulate situations to make it look like accidents, and then they collect the money." Delilah was stunned, her mind spinning as the gravity of what Fiona was saying sank in. "The fertility treatments," she whispered, thinking back to Robert's insistence on using a specific clinic. "He made me go there. He said it was the best, but it was the only one he would consider. Fiona nodded. That clinic is probably part of the scam, too. They artificially increase the chances of multiple births, and then their associates step in to take advantage of the situation. Leoy, Fiona's nephew, who was a sheriff's deputy, walked into the room at that moment. His expression was tense, and he wasted no time in getting to the point. "Aunt Fiona, we need to get them out of here right now," he said, his voice urgent. "I ran a background check on Robert Maxwell. The man is living under a stolen identity. His real name is Deus Thorne, and he's been linked to several insurance fraud cases and suspicious deaths in 3 states. But that's not the worst part." Lucas turned to Delilah, his face grave. "Mrs. Maxwell, your husband isn't just a con man. He's part of a sophisticated insurance fraud ring. They target families like yours, especially those with multiple births. They cause accidents to make the deaths look natural, and then they collect insurance money. They have connections in high places, including hospitals and insurance companies." Delilah's mind was reeling. Her head throbbed, and her hands began to shake as the full scope of what Lucas was telling her sank in. She looked at her babies, who were peacefully sleeping in their cribs, unaware of the danger surrounding them. "How could he do this?" Delilah asked, her voice breaking. "What could be worth all of this? Why would he want to hurt us?" Leoy's face was full of determination. "We've been investigating this group for years," he said. "But they're careful. They make the deaths look like accidents, and they have people in law enforcement and hospitals helping them cover up the truth. We've been trying to gather evidence, but it's been hard to get enough to take them down." Delilah's heart raced as she heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside the cottage. Lucas turned sharply, his expression hardening. "They found us," he said. "We have maybe 20 minutes before they arrive. We need to move fast." Fiona, quick on her feet, spread an old map on the table. "There's an old Forest Service road out back," she said, pointing to the map. "It's rough, but my Jeep can handle it. It leads to a ranger station about 15 miles from here." Lucas shook his head. "That's too obvious," he said. "They'll be watching all the easy escape routes. We need something they won't expect." He turned to Delilah. "Mrs. Maxwell, what I'm about to suggest is risky, but it might be the only chance we have to get you and your children to safety while we work on gathering enough evidence to bring down this whole operation." Delilah nodded, her face set in determination. "I'll do whatever it takes." The minutes that followed were a blur of action. Fiona led them through a hidden door in her pantry, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into darkness. "The previous owner was a Prohibition-era bootlegger," she explained quickly. "There's a tunnel that comes out near the creek." Lucas followed closely behind with the babies, his police training showing in his calm and steady movements. The sound of vehicles arriving outside grew louder, and Delilah's heart pounded in her chest. "They're here," Lucas whispered. Fiona nodded. "Give me 3 minutes," she said. "Then go." Delilah, Leoy, and the babies descended into the tunnel, the walls narrow but tall enough for them to walk upright. The babies, sensing the tension in the air, were eerily quiet as they moved through the dark, damp tunnel. Delilah's C-section scar burned with every step, but she forced herself to keep going. They had almost reached the tunnel's end when they heard shouting from above. "Search everything!" Robert's voice commanded, and Delilah felt a jolt of fear shoot through her. Lucas whispered urgently, "We need to move now." They emerged from the tunnel into the cool morning air, hidden by thick undergrowth near a creek. The sound of rushing water helped mask the noise of the babies, and Lucas quickly led them to a second vehicle, a police SUV with tinted windows. He had somehow prepared everything in advance. As he strapped the babies into their car seats, Delilah felt a moment of relief. "Fiona, will she be okay?" Delilah asked, her voice shaky with worry. Lucas looked grim, but he nodded. "She can handle herself. We just need to focus on getting you and the babies to safety." As they drove down the winding mountain roads, Delilah suddenly gasped. Wait! The hospital bracelets! Robert can trace the babies with those. Lucas immediately stopped the car. They carefully removed the bracelets from the baby's tiny wrists and buried them under a large rock. Lucas let out a sigh of relief. Good thinking, he said. Details like that can save your life. As they continued their journey, Delilah asked Leoy, You've done this before, haven't you? Helped people escape like this? Leoy's jaw tightened. My sister was targeted by a different group, he said quietly. Same kind of thing. Multiple births, insurance policies, tragic accidents. I was too late to save her and my nieces. That's why I started investigating these cases. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. But these people are careful. They have connections everywhere. Law enforcement, hospitals, insurance companies. They make sure there's never enough evidence to take them down. Most of the time, the people who know too much end up dead. Suddenly, an explosion shook the ground. Delilah gasped in horror, but Lucas remained calm. That was the tunnel, he said. Fiona must have set the charges to make sure we were clear. Delilah was shaken. How long have you been watching Robert Maxwell? She asked, her voice weak. Lucas looked at her, his expression pained. About 6 months, he said. We knew something was wrong when he started setting up insurance policies, but we needed proof. Fiona had been helping them gather information, but had been slow going. Lucas added, we couldn't move until we had enough evidence to bring them down. We just didn't want to risk it before. They didn't expect triplets, and it completely changed everything. For several miles, there was nothing but the sound of tires on the road and the steady breathing of the passengers. The silence felt thick, almost suffocating, as Leo focused on the road ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Leo spoke. Did you memorize everything in the envelope I gave you? His voice was steady, but there was a hint of tension underneath. Delilah, sitting beside him, nodded quickly. She had memorized everything. Inside the envelope were crucial documents, plans for their escape, new identities, hidden bank accounts, secret safe houses, and specific protocols for how they were to stay hidden and stay safe. But she couldn't help herself. How did you arrange all this so fast? She asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Leo glanced over at her for a brief moment before answering. We didn't plan this for you, he explained. It was supposed to be for another case, but when I realized what was going on with you and the triplets, I made some calls, changed a few things. The people helping us, they have their own reasons for wanting to take down Robert's operation. Delilah couldn't help but marvel at how quickly Leo had put everything in motion. It had been a whirlwind of events, first the triplets, then the danger they were in. And now this new plan, designed to get them out of the mess they had ended up in. The car suddenly swerved as something moved ahead in the trees. Leo's eyes widened in concentration as a black SUV appeared behind them, its headlights flaring to life in the dark. Delilah's heart nearly stopped when she recognized the driver in the rearview mirror. Philip, Robert's longtime business associate. Hold on, Leo ordered sharply, his voice tense as he pressed down on the accelerator. The car sped around a tight curve in the road. Whatever happens, follow the plan, he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Delilah nodded, holding her breath as the SUV behind them closed the gap. The sound of the triplets waking and starting to cry only added to the rising tension in the car. Delilah turned in her seat, trying to comfort them, but her mind was racing. Looking back out the rearview mirror, she saw the second vehicle coming up ahead, trying to cut them off from the side road. Leo's expression hardened. This isn't good, he muttered. He reached for his radio. This is Deputy Scott. I need immediate backup on Forest Service Road 23. We're being pursued by suspects in the Maxwell case, civilian passengers on board. They're trying to box us in. He paused for a moment, listening to the static on the other end. No clear signal. We're too deep in the mountains. Delilah could feel the panic rising in her chest. They were running out of options, running out of time. She glanced back at her babies, then at the two approaching vehicles, and made a decision that would change everything. "Leo," she said, her voice steady despite the terror bubbling up inside her. "I have an idea." Leo glanced at her. "What?" he asked, not fully trusting what he was hearing. Delilah took a deep breath and quickly laid out her plan. "The old ranger's cabin," she said, her voice low. "I saw it last night. It's just off this road and it connects to the mines." Leo's eyes widened in surprise. "The abandoned copper mines?" he asked, his voice filled with doubt. "They're dangerous." "I know," Delilah replied, her eyes sharp with determination. "But Robert doesn't know I was conscious when he drove me into the forest. I overheard him talking to Philip on the phone about their backup location, the ranger's cabin. They must have supplies there. Maybe even evidence." The SUV behind them rammed into their bumper, jolting the car. The triplets screamed in terror, and Leo quickly jerked the wheel to the right, turning onto a nearly hidden dirt track. "If you're wrong about this," he began, but Delilah interrupted, her voice unwavering. "Robert is too careful not to have a backup plan. He's arrogant enough to think I wouldn't remember anything from last night. But I did." The car bounced as Leo sped down the dirt track, the trees and forest around them growing denser. Finally, they reached the clearing where the ranger's cabin stood, dark and seemingly abandoned. Leo killed the engine and lights. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before they figure out where we turned off. What's your plan?" Delilah quickly grabbed Cameron from his car seat. "We need to hide in the mines. The mines are like a maze, but we won't go far. We'll just go deep enough to make them think we've gone further." Leo's brow furrowed with worry. "The mines are dangerous, Delilah. Cave-ins, bad air." "I know," Delilah cut him off, her voice firm. "But we don't have a choice. We just need to go far enough to fool them into thinking we went deeper." She moved quickly, lifting the babies and moving them toward the mine entrance hidden by overgrown vegetation. They reached the mine's mouth just as the sound of another car's headlights swept across the clearing. Leo pushed Delilah and the babies behind a large piece of mining equipment as 2 vehicles pulled into the clearing, their headlights flashing. Delilah's heart pounded as she watched Robert step out of his car, his face illuminated by a flashlight. "The cabin's been used recently," Philip called out, examining the dust and disturbed patterns around the cabin. "Check inside," Robert ordered, his voice low. "But be careful. Delilah has help." Delilah's heart nearly stopped when one of the triplets whimpered. But just as the men rushed toward the cabin, Delilah heard Leo's voice from inside. "In here. I need help with the babies." Robert and his men rushed toward the cabin's door, and Delilah seized the opportunity. She slipped into the mine's entrance, her breath coming in short bursts as she crouched low to avoid hitting her head on the low ceiling. The pain from her C-section stitches screamed at her, but she pushed through, moving deeper into the dark tunnel with the babies close to her chest. Behind her, the sounds of shouting and running feet echoed in the tunnels. Flashlight beams flickered through the passages, but Delilah stayed still in a side chamber, wrapping the babies in the emergency blankets Leo had given her. She held her breath as voices grew louder and Robert's voice echoed through the darkness. "Find them. They have to be down here somewhere." Delilah waited in the shadows, her pulse racing. After a long while, the voices grew fainter, and the flashlight beams moved deeper into the mine. Delilah knew this was her chance to move. She began quietly making her way back toward the entrance. She was betting everything on Robert's predictability. He would assume they had gone deeper into the mine, not back toward the danger. She was almost there when a hand grabbed her shoulder. Delilah froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She was ready to scream, but then she heard a familiar voice. "It's me," she gasped. It was Leo. I heard shots fired, he whispered, but I had to make them think I went deeper. The police are on their way, but we have to get you and the babies out first. Delilah nodded, relief flooding her. Together they emerged from the mine into the clearing where flashing red and blue lights lit up the night. The chaos was overwhelming. But as Delilah looked around, she realized something was wrong. It wasn't the state police who had arrived. It was the FBI. A Leod voice boomed from a megaphone. The building is surrounded. Come out with your hands up. Robert and his men emerged from the mine, guns drawn, but Robert wasn't looking at Delilah. His eyes were wide with fear, fixed on something behind her. Delilah turned around, her jaw dropping in shock. Walking toward them through the chaos was a woman she had seen before, only in old newspaper clippings. It was Rachel Turner, Robert's supposedly dead first wife, alive and very much well, and she was wearing an FBI tactical vest. Rachel's voice rang out across the clearing. "Deus Robert," she called. "I've been waiting 5 years for this moment." Robert's face twisted with disbelief. "You're dead," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Rachel didn't flinch. "The twins are alive. They've been living with their grandparents in witness protection while I worked to take down your operation." Delilah's mind raced as the pieces started to fall into place. Leo had known about Rachel all along. He nodded to Delilah, confirming it. "Rachel was my contact in the FBI," he explained quietly. "When I realized what was happening, she helped me set up your escape plan." Robert's men began to lower their weapons as more FBI agents emerged from the trees. But Robert's gun remained trained on Delilah, his hands shaking. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "They'll kill me if I don't deliver. The policies are already in place. Millions of dollars in coverage. They're expecting results." Rachel took another step forward, her expression cold and calculating. "You mean the people running your operation?" she asked. "The ones behind all of this?" "Well, Deus, it's over. While you were chasing Delilah and her babies, our team was executing raids across 5 cities. We've already caught everyone." Robert's face turned pale when he heard the news. Delilah could tell he was trying to understand what was happening, and it looked like his world was falling apart. But there was something in his face that made her feel worried. She suddenly remembered that Robert always carried a backup gun, hidden in an ankle holster on his right side. Before Robert could grab his backup gun, Rachel, who was faster, ran over to him. She disarmed him quickly and forced him to the ground, putting handcuffs on him. Other agents took care of Philip and his men. Delilah felt her legs weaken, and Lucas helped her sit on a log while checking on the babies, who were still peacefully asleep despite the chaos. Rachel joined them after handing Robert over to her team. Delilah could see Rachel was strong, determined, but also very kind. "I'm so sorry we couldn't do more sooner," Rachel said softly. "We needed him to make a move to tie all the pieces together. When we learned about your pregnancy, we tried to protect you. But when you found out you were having triplets, everything moved too fast." Delilah nodded, remembering the fertility clinic. "They made sure I would have more than one baby on purpose," she asked. Rachel nodded. "Yes, they planned for multiple births because it meant more money for them. The clinic picked women whose husbands were actually working for the bad group. They knew how to target the right people." Delilah felt anger rise inside her as she looked down at her babies. She hated that people saw them as nothing more than a way to make money. "How many other families?" she asked. "Too many," Rachel said quietly. "But you're the first mother we've seen who fought back so well. Your nursing skills, your quick thinking, you did everything right even without knowing the full story. That's why LS contacted me when he realized what was going on. He saw that same strength in you, the strength to not just survive, but to turn things around." Just then, Fiona, an older nurse, appeared, escorted by the police. Delilah burst into tears of happiness when she saw her alive. Fiona quickly checked on the babies, making sure they were okay. The tunnel charges were my idea, Fiona said proudly. I learned from my late husband, who was a mining engineer. He knew exactly where to place them so we could block off the escape route without risking everything. As medical teams arrived to check on Delilah and the babies, Rachel pulled Lucas aside for a private chat. Delilah could see something was still not finished, and she felt worried. Her suspicions were confirmed when Rachel turned to her and said seriously, Delilah, there's something else you need to know. We found something in Robert's office that we need to talk about. It's about your fertility treatments and some genetic testing the clinic did without you knowing. Delilah's heart skipped a beat as she looked at her children. What kind of genetic testing? She asked. Rachel took a deep breath. It was a test that showed something very special about your triplets. They have a rare genetic combination that gives them natural protection from several serious diseases. Only a few people in the world have this, and it could change how we treat things like lupus or arthritis. Delilah was stunned. So, Robert was supposed to get rid of me and keep the babies alive? Yes, Lucas said. They wanted to keep the triplets and sell their genetic information to make money. They would have erased your children's real identity and used them for research. Dr. Grayson, a genetic expert, leaned forward and spoke gently. I want to be very clear. Your children's genetic traits are special, but they are not magic. It's a natural change in their bodies, something that could help in medicine, but it needs to be studied in a safe and ethical way. What the bad group was doing was about making money, not helping people. Delilah was shocked. What happens now? Are my babies still in danger? Rachel nodded. Yes, there are still people who want your children's genetic information. We've stopped some of them, but we can't be sure we got everyone. That's why we need to talk about what options you have. Lucas spoke up. The witness protection program would keep you safe, but you'd be hiding forever. No, Delilah interrupted firmly. I won't hide. My kids deserve better than that. Rachel smiled slightly. We actually have another option for you. Dr. Grayson pulled out another folder. There's a special program from the National Institutes of Health. It helps families like yours by giving protection and support while also allowing important medical research. You would be in control of everything. Nothing would happen without your permission. Your family would be safe, and you'd be able to live your life just with extra protection. Rachel added, sometimes the best protection is being in the open with the right kind of support, and with your nursing skills, you would be a big help to the research. Delilah looked at her babies, Grace, Jade, and Cameron, sleeping peacefully. She thought about everything they had been through in just a few days. They really could help other people? She asked. Dr. Grayson nodded. Yes, their genetic traits could help find treatments for diseases that don't have cures right now, but only if you choose to help with the research. You and your children will always be in control of what happens. Just then, Fiona knocked on the door and came in with a tray of coffee cups. She had refused to leave Delilah's side and had become like a grandmother to the triplets. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, but these little ones will need to eat soon. As if on cue, Grace started to stir, making a soft sound that meant she was hungry. Delilah picked her up and marveled at how small and perfect she was. Delilah looked at her baby's face and realized that no matter how special they were medically, she just saw her daughter, a tiny miracle in her arms. Tell me more about the program, Delilah said to Rachel and Dr. Grayson. I want to know how it works. As they started talking, Delilah felt a strong sense of purpose. Her children's special genes might help save lives, but even more importantly, they would grow up knowing they were more than just their genes. They were survivors, just like their mom, and their story was just beginning. What Delilah didn't know was that in 5 years, research based on her children's unique genes would lead to new treatments for 3 illnesses that couldn't be treated before. The triplets, as they were called in the research, would inspire many scientists, but they would also grow up as healthy, happy kids surrounded by a big, loving family. This family included a former FBI agent, a kind sheriff, and a grandmother figure who made the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. As for Robert, he never saw his children again. From his prison cell, he sometimes saw news about new breakthroughs in medicine, not knowing that he had almost controlled something so valuable, not for money, but for its ability to help others. It was a fitting punishment for him. 6 months later, Delilah stood in the kitchen of her new house, looking out the big windows at the peaceful street. The house was part of a program from the National Institutes of Health, NIH, and it was everything Delilah wanted for her growing family. It was big, safe, and close to one of the best hospitals in the country. The baby monitor on the counter crackled with the sounds of her baby, Cameron, and soon the sounds of his sisters joined in. At 6 months old, the triplets were doing great and meeting all their milestones. Despite their unique genes, they were just like any other babies. Delilah smiled as she walked into their nursery, filled with soft yellow and green walls and warm morning light. Each baby had their own crib, but Delilah noticed they slept better when they could see each other. Jade, the most outgoing, immediately reached up to be picked up. Just then, the doorbell rang. Delilah saw Fiona, the kind elderly nurse, standing outside with her basket of fresh-baked muffins. Fiona had moved closer to Delilah and now worked part-time at the hospital. "There are my precious ones," Fiona said, taking Grace from Delilah's arms. "How is our mama today?" she asked. Delilah smiled as she adjusted Cameron on her hip. "Better," she said. "The nightmares aren't as bad now." She didn't need to explain more. Fiona understood. Delilah's scary memories from the forest didn't disappear quickly, but with therapy and help, Delilah was healing. "Dr. Grayson called this morning," Delilah added. "They found another family in Sweden with the same genes. They're coming next week to talk about joining the research." Fiona nodded. "That's wonderful. The program has made such great progress with you in it." She gave Delilah a knowing look. "And speaking of progress, I heard Liam is being transferred to the local police department." Delilah blushed a little. Liam, the deputy, had become a regular part of their lives, visiting weekly for security updates and coming to family dinners. "He's been a good friend," Delilah said carefully, but Fiona's smile didn't change. "Friends are important," she said, "especially those who look at you in a special way when you're not looking." Before Delilah could reply, Rachel, an FBI agent, came through the back door. She was dressed casually today instead of in her usual FBI clothes. "Sorry I'm early," she said, accepting coffee from Delilah. "I wanted to talk about something before the research team gets here." Delilah could tell something was serious. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing's wrong," Rachel quickly said. "But we found out something interesting. Remember how we thought Robert's group sold their research data? We found most of the buyers, but one stood out. It's a real medical research foundation that didn't know the data was stolen. They want to make things right." Rachel showed Delilah a tablet with information. "They want to set up a trust fund for the triplets' education and future medical needs, no strings attached. It will be managed by an independent person." Delilah sat down, trying to understand this new information. "You checked everything?" she asked. "It's clean money," Rachel assured her. "This could give your kids opportunities, good schools, maybe even college if they want to follow in your footsteps." "Me?" Delilah said, thinking about how she had to stop her nursing education. "I dropped out." Fiona jumped in. "The hospital where I work part-time has a program for people who want to finish their degrees. They'll work with the research facility to change your schedule." Fiona smiled at Delilah. "Just because I'm retired doesn't mean I can't pull some strings." Delilah looked around at these women who had become her family, Fiona with her wise advice, Rachel with her protective nature, and felt deeply grateful. Then She looked at her babies. They were happily playing on the mat, with Jade trying to reach a toy, Grace watching her sister closely, and Cameron fascinated by his toes. They deserve every chance, Delilah said quietly. But more than that, they deserve to know they are more than their genes. They're not just research subjects or medical miracles, they're children. My children. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed Delilah's hand. That's why you're the best person to guide them. You've never lost sight of what's truly important. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Grayson and her team. The house filled with a busy noise of medical tests and data collection. Delilah watched as her children made everyone smile. Jade's happy laugh, Grace's thoughtful eyes, and Cameron's calm nature. These were the real miracles, far more precious than any genetic discovery. Later, after the team left and the babies were asleep, Delilah sat on the porch watching fireflies. She heard a car pull up and smiled. Liam had arrived for his security check. Rough day? He asked, sitting beside her. Actually, no, Delilah said, realizing it was true. It's been a good day, a day full of possibilities. 5 years later, Delilah stood at the podium at the National Institutes of Health conference. Behind her, a slide showed 3 smiling kindergartners, Jade, Grace, and Cameron, though their faces were blurred for privacy. 5 years ago, I was a victim, Delilah said, her voice strong. Today, I stand before you not just as a survivor, but as a nurse who helps people understand genetics and support them. The program they started together had saved lives, but more importantly, it showed that medical progress could happen without taking away a person's dignity. In the front row, Fiona wiped her eyes with a tissue. Liam, now Delilah's husband, smiled proudly. Rachel, who had recently been promoted, nodded from beside them. Delilah continued, Our program, the Maxwell Project, has changed how we do genetic research and how we protect and support the families who help us. She paused. Every person in our program is a partner, not just a subject. Every child is a child, not just a medical breakthrough. After the presentation, Delilah went to her favorite place, the rooftop garden at the research center. The triplets were downstairs at their art therapy session, learning to express their feelings about their medical tests in a creative way. At 5 years old, Delilah knew she was special in a way that helped other people, but she still had normal kid worries like making friends, drama with her buddies, watching her favorite cartoons, and who got the last cookie at snack time. You did good, kiddo, Fiona's voice came from behind her. Fiona, the older nurse who had always been there, had adopted Delilah 2 years ago. She had become the grandmother the triplets loved. Fiona had slowed down a little, but she was still always there for them. I had good help, Delilah said, giving her adoptive mom a hug. Do you remember the first night when you found us in the forest? I was so scared. And look at you now, Fiona said proudly. Running the patient advocacy program, finishing your master's degree, raising 3 wonderful children, and even landing a great husband. Delilah laughed. Leo says he's the lucky one. She remembered how last week Leo had been called to investigate a case that reminded him of their own. It was about a pregnant woman with problems around her care. Thanks to the rules they had set up, they were able to help before anything bad happened. Dr. Grayson is here, a voice said. The Swedish family is here for their monthly check-in. Of course, Delilah nodded. She loved working with families in the program. She understood their fears and how much they wanted to protect their kids, just like she did for hers. That evening, the house was busy with the sounds of family dinner. Jade was telling everyone about her latest art project with big hand movements. Grace was quietly doing a puzzle while eating, and Cameron was trying to show everyone how broccoli could be used to make towers. Leo caught Delilah's eye from across the table and smiled. He had become a natural father, never making a difference between the kids he shared a biological connection with and the ones they had chosen to love. The triplets called him Dad, and Fiona was Gran. Their family had grown to include Rachel's twins, now teenagers, Dr. Grayson's family, Tinsfra, and other wonderful people who had joined their journey. After the children went to bed, Delilah found herself looking out the window at the backyard. The fireflies were out, reminding her of the many nights she and Leo had spent talking on the porch, when their friendship had slowly turned into love. "A penny for your thoughts?" Leo asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I was just thinking about Robert," Delilah said quietly. "His parole hearing is next month." "He won't get out," Leo said gently. Rachel made sure of that. "Besides, the kids are safe. The world knows they're protected now." Delilah nodded. It was true. The publicity around the Maxwell Project had been a big risk, but it worked. By being open and using trusted institutions, no one could hurt the kids without facing the consequences. "It's not just that," Delilah said softly. "I was thinking about how he never knew what he really had. He saw the triplets as money, then as a medical experiment. He never knew the joy of Jade's laughter, Grace's quiet wisdom, or Cameron's gentle heart. He never got to be part of their story." Leo understood. Their story is still being written, and it's a good one. Just then, a small voice called from upstairs, "Mommy, can you tell us the story again?" Delilah smiled. The triplets loved hearing their story over and over again. To them, it was a tale of adventure about a brave mommy who kept her babies safe in the forest, helped by a kind grandmother, a protective police officer, and a strong FBI agent. As Delilah climbed the stairs to their room, she thought about how far they'd come from that scary night. The special genes that made her children different were only a small part of what made them amazing. What made them extraordinary was their ability to love, be kind, and bring people together. She settled into her storytelling chair, surrounded by her excited kids, and began, as always, "Once upon a time, there was a mommy who discovered that love is the strongest force in the world." As Delilah told the story, she knew in her heart that they had all found their happy ending, not because they hadn't faced challenges, but because they had faced them together, with love. And that was the best ending of all. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Check out our other videos too. See you in the next one.